Listen up, the Sega Genesis is a pretty rad console. Some of you may know that, some of you may not. But today, I'm going to show you some of the best that the console has to offer, so remain seated, shut up, and let's talk. ToeJam and Earl Panic on Funkotron is an accurate representation of what it was like to live in a metropolis throughout the 90s. Mostly because everyone was borked out on acid and beating up and deporting tourists. Panic on Funkotron is a sequel to the original ToeJam and Earl game, and it's so much more entertaining. While the original was an isometric viewed randomly generated puzzle game, the sequel is more of a platformer. The premise is simple. After returning from Earth on the first game, we found out that a ton of Earthlings stowed away on TJ&E's spacecraft, and their presence on Funkotron is spreading panic. The game's title is quite literal. Turns out they're scaring away Lamont the Funkopotamus, which is the source of all the planet's yeah, it was the 90s! Whatever. It's definitely a time capsule of how weird things could get back in the days. Notably, Panic has some stellar animation and music. Everything feels super vibrant and interesting, and there's enough variety in the action to keep you going. Even little Simon Says type minigames stand out because of the fashion in which they're presented. So go out, send them tourists back to Earth, and get the funk back. It's fun, it's simple, the co-op's pretty good, the music's damn funky, I like it. If you don't like Castlevania, well, you're wrong. Castlevania Bloodlines is not only a standout in the Sega Genesis library, but in my opinion, the entire Castlevania franchise. Simply put, it plays like a dream. In Bloodlines, we get to assume control of not one, but two characters. John Morris from Texas and his friend Eric Lecard, who is a man, but does not look like a man, but trust me. Anyways, both of them fight with different weapons. John dons the classic Castlevania whip, while Eric has a spear. You have a decent amount of maneuverability with each character, although they aren't too different from each other. From just a glance, people might be quick to brush off Bloodlines. Sure, it doesn't look as beefy or shiny as Super Castlevania 4, but you know what? I'm gonna go out and say that the soundtrack and level design, aesthetically speaking, is a bit more memorable. Some of the returning compositions, such as Vampire Killer and Bloody Tears, get a hell of a kick with the Genesis pumping out all that bass. I mean, I don't really know what else to say besides the fact that it's Castlevania. A really good Castlevania. Give it a shot, you won't be disappointed. Shining Force 2 is one of those super interesting games that I heard constant chatter about when I was younger, only now to be dropped off the face of the planet. This is probably because of the convoluted naming scheme they've used since the original. Shining in the Darkness, followed up by Shining Force Gaiden, Shining Wisdom, Shining Soul, Shining Tears, and most of those are pretty forgettable. But here's why Shining Force and its sequel, Shining Force 2, are awesome. In the US, we didn't get titles like Fire Emblem or Famicom Wars. With the exception of games like Warsong or Langrisser in Japan, turn-based strategy JRPGs weren't a super common thing in the States. Both of the Force games were huge around me growing up, and if I had to choose one to represent the series, it would be Shining Force 2. Mostly because it was like a steroid-pounding, jacked-up version of the original. It was bigger, the score was better, there were deeper mechanics in the gameplay, and it's just a better game overall. The story's pretty simple. Once you learn of the evil threat, you must lead the Shining Force to take it down once again, but who gives a shit? It was like the first tactical console JRPG that I ever played, and it's kind of like playing your first Final Fantasy or Mario game. You'll never forget it. Despite having a bit of a lighthearted and silly story at times, Shining Force 2 is pretty much a blast the entire way through. It's a shame the series had to get voice acting down the line.
Now bear my Arctic blast.
Beyond Oasis, or The Story of Thor as it's known in other regions, is one hell of a cool game. One part Secret of Mana, another part Zelda, and it's coded in these fictional pre-Islamic Persian vibes. It's also kind of a beat-em-up for some reason, but it works, and let me tell you why. You play as Prince Ali, a treasure hunter and the heir to the throne of Oasis. Prior to the start of the gameplay, Ali, or whatever the hell you want to call him, stumbles upon a golden amulet, and shortly thereafter, all hell breaks loose. Raharl, the previous owner of the golden amulet, appears and lets Ali know that things are a bit fucked up. And Ajito, the owner of the silver amulet, has reawoken. Something holy wars happen in the lore, and it's up to you to save Oasis. So you do. And it's an insanely fun ride the entire time. You end up wielding the power of 4 sprites that are aligned with the golden amulet: Dido, Ifrit, Shade, and Bo. So basically, your repertoire of powers and allies increases with the progression of the game. As far as combat goes, Beyond Oasis is very much a brawler in essence. Any weapons you find are temporary items, and Ali's moveset is mostly kick-oriented, using a dagger in the meantime. You'll always do more damage with the swords and bows you pick up, but you gotta save them for the appropriate time. Bosses are challenging as expected, and the combat is fluid. This game's about as tight as it could be. Oh, also aesthetically speaking, Beyond Oasis is one of the prettiest looking games on the Genesis. Considering this game was developed by Ancient, who is managed by my main man Yuzo Koshiro, you know it kills it in the music department as well. Basically, Beyond Oasis is a killer example of Sega trying to get back at Nintendo. It was part of Sega of Japan's Mega Roleplay project, which was their attempt to reach the RPG audience that the SNES had totally encapsulated. And I think they did a good job. Besides the box art, across all regions. Somebody messed up. Wonder Boy in Monster World was a standout title from the Wonder Boy series that really enamored me when I was younger. Having played other games in the series, it was really a shocker when I found out that the game had a free roaming aspect. Suddenly, I wasn't bound to just moving forward, but instead, yo, here's this kick-ass world, go get some money, go get some gear and kill some shit. And oh my god, I rented this game 4 times back to back when I was a kid. This was basically like my first Metroidvania game, and I played it over and over. You control Shion in his quest to save Monster World from the threatening biomecha. Man, all these games have like the same plot. You overcome challenges and get gear. And okay, listen, games back then didn't need to have strong plot points. It was all about the gameplay. Exciting, fun, and addicting gameplay. Monster World? It was solid. The progression of gear and spells just felt so right. Sure, the bosses may not be that challenging in the early game, but the whole grand adventure feel that it had just blew me away when I was a babby. Everything about this game really sells itself. Well, except the music. Oh my god, the music is pretty horrendous. This game probably would have been way higher on the list if not for the Genesis sounding like an attention-craving YouTube commenter. Don't you do it. I've already talked extensively about Gunstar Heroes at this point, but the TLDR is basically, play this game right now, play it co-op, and do it you little shit. So watch this after that if you want to hear my extended thoughts. So by this point, you've probably played a classic 2D Sonic game. You know the spiel, go fast, sometimes, get hit a bunch, trial and error, get better at the game, and then speed run, maybe write some fanfiction. But for the game on the list, I'm gonna be entering a storm by picking Sonic 2 over Sonic 3 and any iteration of Knuckles. Why? Level design. I recently played through both just because I was conflicted myself. For the longest time, I thought that Sonic 3 and Knuckles was the best one. If you look at it from a technical aspect, Sonic 3 is superior in just about every single manner. It's bigger, it's shinier, Knuckles is cool, Michael Jackson's cool, double cartridges are cool. But I felt the level design, especially in the latter half of the game, was a bit convoluted and punishing for no reason. I prefer the simplicity that Sonic 2 really nails. Zones like Emerald Hill, Mystic Cave, Chemical Plant all have such memorable layouts and that will never leave me. A level like Ice Cap or Carnival Night might have some standout moments and music, but they're a bit confusing in design. To top it off, sometimes you just move too quickly for the screen. Sonic 2 does a good job of really letting the player know where they are. Branching paths were more obvious and attainable. The final encounter with Dr. Robotnik was exhilarating and well, it's just a solid experience through and through. I guess besides the special stages anyway, those can go piss off and die. But yeah, Sonic 2's great. I guess we can make this Sonic 2 and Knuckles if you want. I mean, Knuckles is kinda cool. Unlike Sonic, he don't chuckle. Kill me. Here's the big one, everybody. The Phantasy Star series is pretty much Sega's direct answer to Nintendo/Squaresoft's Final Fantasy. And oh boy, Phantasy Star 4 delivers. This is about as hardcore as an old school JRPG can get. But it wasn't really that grindy. Instead, it was just fucking hard. But you know what made up for that? Glorious anime cutscenes. 1,000 years after the events of Phantasy Star 2, we assume the role of Chaz, a young hunter in training. In this world, the planet of Motavia has been overrun by monsters that need to be controlled, thus the need for hunters. Without spoiling too much of the plot, let me just say this. Shit hits the fan in Phantasy Star 4. A lot. Characters die. Main characters die. Like, make 7-year-old me cry die. Speaking of main characters, Phantasy Star 4 has a lot of them. 11 to be exact, so you're gonna get to see them come and go as the plot advances, really adding to the amount of excitement that one's gonna feel in anticipation for the events that unfold. It's kinda hard to talk about Phantasy Star 4 without getting into spoiler territory, so I won't delve too deep. But I will say that the story itself, the challenges presented to the player, and everything really stand toe-to-toe with some of the Final Fantasy giants. The only thing really bringing this down from the number 1 slot in my eyes is the hit and miss soundtrack. When Izuho Numata and Masaki Nakagaki's score hits, it hits hard. However, some of the tracks fall super short, and it's not even a problem with the composition. The Genesis sound chip just wasn't super capable of putting out songs with a more mellow tone. With Sega back in the day, it was all upbeat and in your face. I'm sure a lot of Phantasy Star 4's compositions would sound amazing on actual instruments or hell, even an SNES sound chip. But for what it is, it simply falls short. Still a great game though, 10 out of 10. I wonder how many times I can get away with gloating about Rocket Knight Adventures on my channel. 5 more, let's go. Rocket Knight is a straight-up masterpiece. It's still so overlooked, and it makes me upset that Sparkster didn't become a household name in the 90s. Basically, you're Sparkster, an opossum knight, and you're gonna save the world. The controls, pristine. The soundtrack, top tier for the time. The gameplay, tighter than Chandler and Joey. It simply couldn't get any better than this. It takes a lot for me to want to replay a game, and I find myself completing Rocket Knight once every few months, it's that good. But again, I've gone into a decent amount of depth about this in my Sparkster video, which I recommend you check out if this game intrigues you. So what are you expecting for number 1 to be? I hope it was a beat 'em up, cause Streets of Rage 2 is my favorite game on the Genesis, if not of all time on any system. I'll put this bluntly, the beat 'em up genre was packed to the brim back in the day. Every time period was covered, no country was safe, but god damn was Streets of Rage 2 a masterfully crafted piece of art. And I can tell you why that is. To me, nothing beats a good co-op game, and nothing beats that other than a good co-op game with a super rad soundtrack by none other than our previously mentioned Yuzo Koshiro. That's right, 2 ancient games on this list. Streets of Rage 2 was cool, because it didn't really tell you about the combos, you had to figure them out. There are multi-directional inputs and just different enough movesets for each of the game's main characters, Adam, Blaze, Max, and Skate, to feel like their own. And you know what that means? Replayability plus co-op. That's a recipe for disaster, similar if not stronger than the effect that Gunstar Heroes has. Visually, it's pretty striking. The character sprites are massive and their details really stand out. Each stage feels like a continuation of the previous while having a massively different feel. The music helps to move things forward in a manner that makes a beat 'em up of all things not feel repetitive. I don't know what to say. Whenever I think of the Sega Genesis, my mind immediately comes to Streets of Rage 2. You don't even have to own a Genesis to play it, as Sega has ported this in just about every game on this list to multiple platforms. But nothing really beats plugging in that old dusty Genesis and seeing and hearing what that device from the late 80s could put out. Streets of Rage 2 is fantastic, and you need to play it. So there you have it, 10 of what I think to be some of the best games in the Sega Genesis library. Please, do yourself a favor and try any of these, you're not gonna regret it. Anyway, till next time, I've been I'm not ending this video with a joke?